after talking about what happened in Parliament this week, Adi, let's move on to Singapore's budget debate. So Lawrence Wong the other day just wrap up his budget debate the other day, and Lawrence Wong's Deputy Prime Minister, soon to be in the end of the year, as a replacement for Lee Hsien Loong. So become new Prime Minister from the outside Lee Kuan Yew's family. Put that aside. What's your take, or something you can highlight from Singapore's budget debate?
I think the leading up to the debate was very much anticipated from all eyes were really on Lawrence Wong this time. Not much in terms of Lee Hsien Loong's participation. Definitely setting up to become the successor for the People's Action Party moving into the elections and Prime Minister candidate. So definitely putting him out there to prove himself to the people if whether or not he can win the confidence with this new budget. I know there was a lot of interviews he made to Channel News Asia, all kinds of interactions with other stakeholders on what this budget brings to the table. And it's definitely one that did match up. I mean, in terms of what he said leading up to the budget and the budget itself, in terms of the speech and the debate, was quite synchronized. So definitely planned out a budget that was definitely meticulously thought out, planned out, and delivered. Of course, with some kind of disagreement from the Workers' Party and the rest of the Singaporean opposition, who I think they don't necessarily disagree on the nature of the budget, but I think in terms of where can the budget be better used in terms of ensuring the well-being and prosperity of Singapore and its people. I think there was a bigger conversation I think I'll touch on later, which is about the use of Singapore's reserves to prop up the economy, which I think is the fundamental disagreement between the Singapore government and its opposition. They agree on a lot of things, but this is a very fundamental disagreement that they have.
Yeah, when pushed, Mr. Pritam was really by Vivian the other day, and he said, like, yeah, I do agree on principle, but on other things, yes, we do have some disagreement. So that's very different from Malaysia's parliament, if you want to say. Some highlights that I want to talk about from the Singapore's budget debate is one. Do you know, Adi, that both Malaysia and Singapore spend about 1% of their GDP on research and development? You, as professionally a researcher, this might interest you that even on the percentage, it's the same, but the actual amount of money is, if you compare to per capita and the size of Singapore's GDP, of course, the 1% for Singapore is astonishing for their country. And they are not trying to back down anytime soon because they believe the country in the next 21st century or even going into the 22nd century. So that's very, very interesting how people see the moment. People like started comparing themselves with, hey, we're going to do something very good. This is something very prosperous for the country. Let's compare ourselves to Singapore. But Singapore himself tried to very much humble, even in their own parliamentary session, and the way they carry themselves in a manner of discussing this is really interesting. And what I found out also that this move that foresight to anticipate the future in terms of policy making, and in Malaysia, it's quite the opposite. Because for us, R&D is not enough being done in Malaysia, and we still have a lot of times that we caught ministers or deputy ministers saying that, hey, this policy need or whatever issues need some researching. So we will, the usual phrase is kaji dulu, then we will tell you later. So this kaji dulu is reactive. That already, if we being pushed to that level, means we are already lag behind. But for Singapore, R&D is, they use this to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. So these are totally two different things. And with whatever data or insights that they have, they're definitely going to successfully maneuver themselves into a new IR 4.0 with AI right now. Even the other day, one of the MPs talk about AI and the uprising of a new invention by OpenAI, which is Sora, create video and text prompt. So this is, he even said that I was expecting this another 2-3 years, not in 10 months after ChatGPT was launched. So even he was surprised how speed things happen in science and technology. And we are in Malaysia still talking about petty technicalities that Prime Minister shouldn't be saying thanks to whatever time they have. So in terms of content that being discussed in Parliament, we need to up our game. Definitely talk about contemporary issues that concerning a lot of things, especially gig economy as well, that have no solution. But just I think earlier today, CEO of Grab was meeting with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. I'm not sure what the outcome is, but hopefully it's something gonna be good news to all our abang-abang riders out there that putting their to put food on the table. So that's another thing. Another thing that I want to highlight from the discussion of deep sync is skills future. So for Malaysia, we have something similar program for upskilling and reskilling by HRD Corp. But here's the interesting part, the implementation. Because skills future is already being allocated to each and every Singaporean citizen. Basically means, let's say I'm a Singaporean citizen, I already entitled for certain amount of money, and if I in the certain group of a cohort of, let's say, about 40, I entitled for certain other things as well. But in Malaysia, the way that they do it is just, hey, we have a quota of X of ringgit. Whoever sign up first and then utilize this through whatever company that later can claim. That's why we always have HRDF claimable stuff. And then we're gonna do it. So let's say if the fund is 5 million ringgit and 5 million ringgit for upskilling this and that, this. I think this is a very lazy way of implementing reskilling and upskilling, because I like the way, due to how it's very specific target that certain age group, because those who are in the 40s may have different needs because they may have life experience or work experience, but they do not have the IT know-how or certain AI know-how that they can leap on. But for Malaysia, it's just you are 18 years old, doesn't matter, just come in, and it's not so sure where it's gonna be after that. After you are equipped with this knowledge, where you gonna head to? So there's no continuity in terms of that as well. And another thing that I like about how Singapore implement skills feature is this will reduce the so-called corruptions or false claim by certain training provider, because I'm already certain amount allocated for this. If I don't attend physically or register myself, you cannot claim. But for Malaysia system, if the quota is there, they can just create a ghost customer or whatever, and then in order for them to redeem from HRDF. So this is a lot of loopholes that can be seen here in terms of implementation. And I would like to see if Malaysia can do something or emulate something better from Singapore. And this just two thing is amazed me when I watch the whole budget debate. And on top of that, how Lawrence Wong is just wrap budget within 1 hour mark compared to our budget from our Minister of Finance, which is going to take like around 3 hours. So yeah, they have bigger economy, but somehow they can do it much less with much. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in how budgets from both countries are presented. I feel when it comes to Malaysia's budget, it doesn't matter which prime minister. The speech always sounds the same, which is more just of a wrap up of what the economy is doing so far, how much is being allocated, but it doesn't really take into account the qualitative disposition of the budget itself. It's always just, this is how much we're allocating, this is why we're doing it, but we're not really going to get into much of that. There's no, how do you say, ambitious schemes or plans in the pipeline that inspires confidence for people to actually dig into. Not to mention, the leading up to the budget is usually when in Malaysia the budget is presented and that's it. People come to analyze it maybe a few days before, a few days after, then it dissipates into obscurity. It's not like Singapore where there's always a huge coverage over the budget, even a month or two beforehand. But okay, then just now let's go back to the nature of the Singapore budget and how we compare to Malaysia. You mentioned how HD Corp compared to SkillsFuture, right? But I think when we break it down, these two programs definitely are some kind of welfare and benefit programs for the people. Now, why I think we do this in a, let's say, Malaysia's way, in so to speak, how you mentioned it, described as a bit more lazy or not as qualitative or holistic compared to Singapore, I think has to do with the culture of how we use welfare as a tool for uplifting the citizenry. For welfare in Singapore, they always adopt a very strict idea of fiscal responsibility. They're always very responsible to make sure every single penny counts somehow, and that there's no wastage or any kind of wastage basically. I mean, leakage is a completely different thing, but wastage is something that is almost seen as a sin for a lot of the programs in Singapore, because just less money to go around and more things you have to focus on. Whereas in Malaysia, we never really adopted those ideas of or that culture of fiscal responsibility. I think this has to do with the fact that Singapore is definitely way more limited in terms of opportunities back then when it became independent, or when we kicked out Singapore. They were left basically on their own and had to compete in a way by the skin of its own teeth. Malaysia kind of has it a bit more easier coasting along during those early years. So Singapore definitely developed this idea, this culture of, we need to make sure everything counts. We need to make sure everything works, everything is operated smoothly, efficiently, so that we can maximize every single drop of resources, which I think Singapore definitely is trying to do. I mean, this kind of budget, when you say SkillsFuture, harnesses that kind of culture, which is, we're going to maximize everyone's potential so that we can transform the economy to one that is sufficient and ready to take on the challenges of the next decade. So you even see they're already looking towards the next decade and the decade after that to make sure that everyone is properly equipped. And that kind of social engineering, that kind of social assistance, you won't see that in Malaysia. One, because Singapore just is that more centralized and it's easy to deliver those kinds of services. You can easily get a lot of these SkillsFuture assistance, or even these claimable schemes through the CDCs, the Community Development Councils. For Malaysia, with how many majlis daerahs we have here, can they act as a CDC in a way? Like, can you reform the majlis daerah to act as a CDC like how it works in Singapore? Definitely not, because one is just not, we don't have that kind of cultural capital in a way, so to speak, to take on or to reform in that kind of way, or to transform in that kind of way. Singapore thrives on limitations. Malaysia, we tend to believe that there's no such thing as limitations. We think everything can be unlocked, everything can be, we have abundance of this and that, we can do whatever we want. But that is the issue here. We are working with very real limitations, and with the economic situation that we're facing in Malaysia, that's even an added layer of limitations. I think that is the fundamental difference between Singaporean policymakers and Malaysian policymakers, is that we believe that we can do everything and anything we want if we put our minds to it. Singapore, they know what they can or cannot do, so they prioritize and they make the most out of every single thing that they have. I think in a way that's a good thing. It's kind of like the analogy would be the artist, is that an artist seems to thrive when he has very real, tangible limitations. So Singapore, in a way, you can paint as an artist with very real deficiencies, but can make the most out of every single resource they have. Malaysia, a different story.
Even the recent news that Taylor Swift will be visiting the only country in Southeast Asia is
Southeast
Singapore,
Asia, and because they
and
bought it all out.
the minister responsible for this say they take a huge pride in this, and it shows that it's not just hosting a concert, Adi, but beyond of international company or everyone else in Singapore that they try to preserve as much as they can. You know, about it's not about profiteering all the so-called all these people that buying tickets, scalpers of buying early tickets and to hack the system, bypass this and that, so that they can get the ticket. But more important than that, Singapore is a safe haven for everyone to do any business, and that's what Vivian also mentioned the other day, that in relation of Hamas and Israel conflict, that despite the Israel's try to ban the international law or even broke the international law, Singapore needs to maintain their position to sever the diplomatic ties, because this will, burning any bridge would be a bad call for Singapore. So at the end of the day, Vivian also established that yes, we may disagree with in terms of how others conduct themselves, but Singapore as an existence itself must maintain any diplomatic ties with any country. I guess that tells it all that foreign policy for Singapore is priority number one when it comes to the order of do Singaporean care the time. So, but for we may not have enough time for it here. But Adi, any other things that you would like to highlight from Singapore budget debate?
I think another thing to up is that how, when you look at the disagreements between the opposition and the government, you can kind of see they almost always have very similar stances. Like you said, we agree in principle, and it's a very, compared to Malaysian politics, it's such a civil, very, how would I describe this? They're very nice about it in a way. It's
Very civil about it.
yeah, very civil. I don't want to say civil because it implies that we're barbaric, but who knows?
The new album would agree with us.
Yeah, it's up to you to decide whether or not the Malaysian Parliament is barbaric or not. But relative to Singapore, maybe. But yeah, they're done it in a way that's so polite about it, and it's just fundamental differences, and they still know how to navigate through those fundamental differences. It's like what I mentioned earlier was the use of the reserves to tap into new opportunities to uplift the lower income groups in Singapore. But of course, the PAP has always been very how do you say? Would the word be how do you say, conservative
Frugal?
with
Yeah.
frugal with their expenses when it comes to tapping on the reserves, because the reserves is usually something that is only kept, according to Lawrence Wong, for a rainy day. And only time where he mentioned that in terms of tapping into the reserves is to find a way to convert it into assets that could assist Singapore in adding value. So when it comes to using the reserves for something like Terminal 4, is it Terminal 4 for Changi Airport? That's a way of asset conversion, is that as long as that reserve itself is used to convert to an asset which would add value, then that is fair game to be utilized. But of course, the Workers' Party with Pritam Singh kind of having a bit of a back and forth with Sito Yipin, the way it was describing, talking to themselves, each other, was that this is why we don't want to use the reserve. Yeah, but then again, we want to think of the reserve as this, right? That kind of like exchange is very non-confrontational, but at the same time just trying to dig at each other enough to get adequate answer. So this is like in terms of political culture, I would say very vastly different than from our parliament in Malaysia here. But I think this also kind of highlights the whole fiscal responsibility and fiscal management of Singapore. They make sure every single dollar counts, and they would make sure that it would only be used. Every dollar they would maximize every potential of every dollar used, compared to here. So this is something we can definitely adopt, because we like to say that, oh, we cannot be like Singapore, but it doesn't take much to be like Singapore. You just need to have a bit more fiscal discipline, and you need to have just a bit more vision and an understanding of what you're working with. Do you think these are the recipes when it comes to state building? It's not how much you have, it's how much you're only able to do. It's when you work within these kinds of boundaries, do you have a more realistic idea of where you want to go forward? I don't really like to hear speeches anymore where the leader would say that, we have all these endless opportunities, we have all these boundless resources, that we're so rich in this and so rich in that. I want to know, what can we actually do? It's like, what do we have that's limiting? I want to know what we're missing, what kind of things that we don't have, so we can kind of work towards reaching that. It's the Dutch disease, basically. It's when you have too many resources, you tend to lag behind in terms of development. And I think the comparison between Malaysia and Singapore kind of illustrates that whole notion, that whole idea, is that if you don't have as many resources, you would maximize everything. If you have too many resources, you may not catch up in terms of development. So this is what I would like to take. I mean, not the budget particularly, but the attitudes that the Singaporean members of parliament actually have towards formulating a budget. Very different from Malaysia. And with Singapore having all its data, having all its thinkers and researchers, it's like you said, R&D, being so laser focused in what they want, is kinds of making me think that we can get there. We just need to adopt a few fundamental principles when it comes to looking at how we do policies and how we do budgets.
Yeah, even in the first minute of Lawrence Wong's speech, he opened his speech by mentioning that Singapore is not like Dubai that has a lot of oil, like Brunei or other countries that have natural resources. Singapore has, in fact, said nothing. So it's up to us to maintain this prosperity that we have now. So spirit open and that everyone in the that this is the spirit that they want come. Then I guess, Adi, that translated in how they discuss and debate their policies. That's very I'm going to use the word very civil and very polite, and this is translated into their content as well, like how they actually propose 1% of the GDP towards R&D and other things as well. So yes, this is something that Malaysia should emulate too, and I think we have a lot of things that we should be improved on when it comes to governance in Malaysia. So I think that's it for Singapore's budget debate we have on Kopitiam Council. We're going to talk about, again, I think this is 3 weeks in a row. We're going to talk about Russia again. But this time is the anniversary, 2-year anniversary of Russia-Ukraine war, coming up next.